Hey, Dave Frary here. Welcome to this little video about building the Expo module. Now, the Expo module is just an HO standard gauge module. It's 4 feet long, 2 feet wide, and the rail, when we're done with this, will stand about 40 inches from the floor. That way, all the other modules that are built to the same standards, they'll all align with each other. It'll be easy to connect them together, and we can run the trains. What I've done is put down a sheet of 1/2 inch thick gator board. This is gator board. It's pretty tough stuff. It has a resin coated paper top. It has foam in the middle, and it's fairly waterproof. In fact, I had this sheet in the back of my truck when I brought it back from where I bought it. It was raining to beat the band, and the sheet never buckled or warped or absorbed any water. So I guess it's made for the outdoor sign business, and it certainly will work good for that. Over the gator board, I have a sheet of 1 inch thick pink foam. This is regular insulating foam, and you can get this in places like Home Depot or any building supply center. Now, in some places, I want to have a little bit of a higher area, so I've added another piece of 1 inch foam. I'm going to put a lighthouse here. There'll be water here. These bridges are just deck girder plates glued to the side of the 1 inch foam, and they make a pretty reasonable looking bridge. I've also have the 1 inch foam under the track to support it. I didn't hollow out under the track, although I did go in here and I carved out a little bit so you can kind of look under, but you're looking right at black paint. So on this side of the module over here, you can see I've added some white 1/4 inch thick foam core. This is where the roads are going to be, or the road. There'll be one road coming through the middle of this. And every place I'm going to have a structure, I've added a little piece of foam core to sit it on. I want the structures up so that they are fairly equal with the height of the track. In between, I took a piece of basswood and I cut it to shape, and I beveled the edges so that it sits down at least a 1/64 of an inch below the rail level. And the reason for this is that when we go to clean the track, we don't want to be tearing up the scenery. We want to clean just the tops of the rails and not the roads while we're doing it. And over on this side, I have a piece of styrene and a piece of very thin styrofoam. I want the structure I put here to sit down a little below the scenery. It's in the background, and the way I've built this, I've built it kind of backwards because the horizon is going to be back here on the backdrop. So I want everything except for the lighthouse to kind of go downhill as it goes to the back. This is just opposite of most philosophies of model railroads where you build the back up. You give the buildings a better look, and there's actually a better spatial relationship if everything goes up. I'm going to try it the opposite and see what happens. The first and foremost, this is a lighthouse. This is a Walthers plastic kit that I had on the shelf. I had built it for another project and never used it, but you can see it's going to look very nice here. In this area where the weights were holding the foam in place, by the way, I use liquid nails to glue everything down here. I like it. There's going to be this little structure. It needs some paint, but it's going to be sitting just about like this. Now here, I'm putting the Foss scale, Dave's oyster or Celiosa's oyster, Dave's barbecue or whatever it is. I'm putting this here, and right in front of it here, I'm going to be putting a little pier. I haven't decided how it's going to go yet, probably something like that. This stuff was built up for another project and I never used it. I always overbuild when I do this. Okay, for the other side of the street here, I'm going to put in this little building, which is all set. You see it's already on a base and it already has details on it. I'm going to put that there, and I'm going to put this Robin Hood Beer Company probably somewhere in here. I don't want these buildings to compete with the lighthouse. I want the lighthouse to stand alone and be the predominant feature on the layout. This little building is going down at sea level right in front of the lighthouse. And this building is going in the front right-hand corner. Last but not least is this plaster model of Marble Station. It's going in the foreground right beside the track. There's only one more building to place, and that's in the very foreground, which will be right here. It's a little large for HO scale, but it works in the foreground because it is a little oversized. I don't know where the building came from. It was one of the things I built a long time ago, and I put it on a little base with a few details around it, but it'll fit good there beside the track. My next step here is to put in any retaining walls, especially the sea walls around here, the rocks around the front of the lighthouse, and then we'll finish the scenery. These sea walls are cast in resin from a rubber mold I made from an original, and what I did, I ran them through the bandsaw so that they were about the same height as our little foundation, the pink foam and the styrene here. And what I'm going to do with them, I'm going to hold them in place using liquid nails, and I put a little bead on, and I'm just going to push it into place here. Now, liquid nails is okay, but you got to allow it to set for several hours and sometimes overnight. I also, as you can see in the picture, I took the ends of the retaining walls and I put them on the sander, and I set the little guide on the sander at 45 degrees so that it sanded the ends at 45-degree angles so I could just push them together. Now, if you look at them straight on, the rocks really don't match very well. But for this thing, nobody's ever going to see that, so it doesn't have to be perfect. All you need is a piling in front of it, and you've hidden it. You'll see as I prop these retaining walls in place and prop some of the rocks and other things in place as I build this, that I use a lot of weights. And these weights have been collected over the years from who knows where. I don't know where I got them all. Every time I'd see something that looked like I could use it in the hobby, I'd pick it up and stick it in my pocket and bring it home. So I have a collection of weights, a really large collection, and I use them every day for almost every project. Now I'm putting the rocks in place. These are pieces of styrofoam rocks that are sold by Scenic Express. I use these all the time for most everything because they're lightweight, they are fairly inexpensive for what they are, and there's no waste with them. You can manipulate them by cutting them, breaking them, and using them in many different places. I'm using liquid nails to hold the little pieces in place, and I know that some of these rocks, after they've been mounted in place, will be covered by sculptor mold. But you can take a wet brush and you can brush away some of the sculptor mold to reveal the tip of the rock. After all the little rock pieces are glued in place, I'm going to wait a while, perhaps an hour or two. Then the rocks will be ready to apply the sculptor mold. And you can follow along and watch me do it here. I use sculptor mold for almost all my projects, and I think it's the best terrain building material that's available. Here's the little 1-inch high platform for the building that will set here right next to the water, and it needs some kind of retaining wall system around it. And looking through my scrap box, I found these 1-inch high pieces of precast resin retaining walls. Some are painted, some aren't. And I'm using Beacon's 3-in-1 craft adhesive. I use this for a lot of stuff. It's as good as liquid nails on some things. And if you need some real tack and you need something that will hold something in place or fill a gap or something like that, the Beacon 3-in-1 is pretty good. And it doesn't attack styrofoam. And you'll see here I'm using weights again, and I'm going to apply some Beacon 3-in-1 craft adhesive to another little piece of wall here, and then slide the weight up to hold everything in place until the Beacon stuff dries. Here's all the little weights in place, and everything is waiting for the sculptor mold to come. For those of you not familiar with sculptor mold, It's a product made by the American Art Clay Company in Indianapolis, Indiana, and it's sold in most craft stores and in many larger hobby shops. I like it because it mixes cleanly with water. In other words, it doesn't leave a residue on the bowl, on the spatula. Everything cleans up very, very easily and quickly with the water. And you have the advantage of working Sculptamold for about 20 to 30 minutes before it finally hardens. Now, what I do, I trowel it on and just move it around and fill space with it. I finish my sculpting by using a wet brush, and with the wet brush you can push it into nooks and crannies. You can create surface texture, because Sculptamold by itself has more or less the texture of cottage cheese. So all the final finishing and texturing of the surface, I like to do it with this. This is a 1-inch China bristle brush. It's been around the world. I use it for everything. I have a whole box full of these. They all look just like this one, very grubby looking. But I keep dipping this in water, and then you can use the bristles to pat, like I'm doing here, pat on the texture, or you can push the Sculptamold in place. It's still very workable. And one of the last things I'm going to do with this, I'm going to take the tip of the brush and I'm going to push some of the Sculptamold down over the edge where I think that I'm going to put sand. It's time to mix another batch of Sculptamold, and you can see how simple this is. This is just, I just put some in a paper cup and dump it in the rubber mixing bowl and then just add some water to it. This is the way it looks in the craft store when you see it. I can't show you a bag here on the layout because I don't have a bag. I have a 50-pound container of this stuff. I use an awful lot of it. Now I've mixed a much looser consistency here, and I'm troweling it around the rocks where the lighthouse will sit. Now you'll see I'm covering up some of the rocks, and I don't really care about that. The rocks behind the Sculptamold provide a little bit of bulk, and if I'm really concerned about showing these rocks, I can take the wet brush and go in here and move some Sculptamold away from the face of the rock. So this little demonstration will give you some idea of how to use Sculptamold or any other modeling product on your module. I chose Sculptamold because when it dries, it's very lightweight, it's strong, and it's slightly flexible. I've been using it on modules and sectional layouts for years without a problem. Earlier in this video, you saw me mixing Sculptamold and then applying it around the lighthouse base. Now I'm finishing around the rest of the layout by smoothing in the contours, just using the spatula that comes with the rubber bowl, and then using a wet brush to push and sculpt and shape the wet Sculptamold. Once it dries, if you don't like how it looks, you can always cut it away with an X-Acto knife and just replace it. It's very forgiving. You'll notice that I put blue tape on the edges of the bridge so that I wouldn't have to go back and clean them if I made a mistake and got some Sculptamold on them. You'll see later on, as I start to work around the track, that I'll put blue tape all over the track area to protect the track and to keep the paint and Sculptamold away from it for the time being. In addition to the Sculptamold, on a project like this, I like to use a lot of lightweight spackle. The same stuff that you'd use to fill a crack or a hole in a piece of drywall in your home. As you can see here, I've troweled the lightweight spackle in and around some of the flat areas where I needed just to fill the crack, but I didn't want any extra texture. As I demonstrated in the previous video, the brush is just used to shape and to sculpt the wet Sculptamold. And here all I'm doing is just patting the brush on the Sculptamold just to kind of flatten it out, because this whole area will be covered with ground texture, and the texture will just cover up any nooks and crannies in the surface of the Sculptamold. So here we are sculpting around the edge of the building base, and this looks pretty messy here, what I'm doing now. But what you're seeing is just the white residue from the sculpting process and from the water that's leaking out of the sculptor mold. And I'll correct all this just by taking a brush and going in and getting the contours the way I want them. And then I'll take a paper towel and go in and absorb any excess water. It takes sculptor mold at least overnight and sometimes several days to set. Or I should say, it takes it several days to actually dry out. It sets in about 20 minutes. And this is because of the conditions where you live, how dry your workshop is, where you're actually building the module. But after several days, the sculptor mold will dry. It'll be very strong, it'll be flexible, it'll be very lightweight. You can add scenery over it, you can paint it, you can do anything that you do with any other scenic material. I'm just about done with the sculptor mold on this module. One of the last steps, if you need an area to be perfectly smooth, I'm going to set a structure right here, is to wet your hand and just go in and rub the sculptor mold until it gets perfectly smooth. While I have the sculptor mold handy, it's a natural time to add the fascia to the front of the module. Now, we decided on a standard of 5 inches deep for the fascia, and that means 5 inches from the top of the pink foam hanging down over the edge of the module. I'm using a foam core here, which is about 1/4 of an inch, maybe 3/16 of an inch thick. It's used in the picture framing business, and I bought a 40 by 60 inch sheet at AC Moore in the picture framing section of the store. So what I'm doing, I'm temporarily clamping the piece onto the front of the module, and then I'm going to mark out where the waterway is and cut that out with an X-Acto knife and then mount the fascia board. I'm going to use liquid nails and then yellow carpenter's glue to kind of hold this in place temporarily. I'm using a long piece of strapping to make sure that the front of the fascia board is making good contact with the front of the module. After the liquid nails set, probably overnight here, I'll put a couple of drywall screws into the fascia here and there just to make sure that it stays in place. One of the last steps is to knock off any ragged edges on the fascia board, and I'm just using a sanding block here with medium weight sandpaper, and I'm just kind of cleaning up the front edge. Now this will all be sealed with paint, several coats of paint. The next to last step here is to drizzle some yellow glue down between the scenery and the fascia board, and all this is just an extra layer of protection, an extra layer of adhesion to help hold the fascia in place. This is a portable piece. It's going to get knocked around, and no matter how careful you are, you're bound to put some stresses on this fascia. So the last thing to do after the glue is all in place is to get a paper towel and go in here and clean up any excess glue and make it look nice. Here I've painted the fascia and the sides of the module black per the specifications, and now I'm starting to paint the scenery. And for the scenery, for the rocks and some of the areas that I'm going to dry brush, I use a concoction of paint that I call Scenery Black. And Scenery Black is just flat black paint mixed with 2 parts of earth. So it's 1 part flat black, 2 parts earth. Now, how do you select the earth? You can go out in your yard, get some sandy earth, bring it in the house, glue it to a piece of white card, take it to the paint store and have them match it. Or you can take a photograph of the dirt by the side of the track of your favorite railroad and have them match that. But ultimately what you want to have is a color that looks like earth, that is flat indoor wall paint. Don't get satin finish, don't get semi-gloss, you want flat indoor wall paint. What I like to do is to use the scenery black as a base for rock coloring. Once this is dry, I'll use the 4 rock colors that I like, which are black, white, raw umber, and raw sienna, and I'll dry brush the rocks, the stones, the retaining walls. I'll do all of that first, then I'll come back and I will add texture and dry brushing to the rock surfaces after everything is dry, and then I'll dry brush some of the earth. Here's the earth color I'm using on this, which is kind of a beige color, and I'm painting right over, as you can see, right over the wet scenery black. Really doesn't make much difference because by the time I'm done with this, everything's going to be a different color, or more or less of a different color anyway. So this is just the base color. This establishes the ground color for the module. After this is dry, what I'll do, I'll come in here and I'll add some texture to the road surface, and then I'll start with the grass and the ground texture for the fields and the areas between the buildings. So you always have this earth color in the background or behind everything, then it'll show through and you can look through the grass and see some earth. So I'm going to finish painting the whole module here, and then I'm going to go away for a couple of days and let everything dry. I want this all to be bone dry before I start anything else. And now it's time for me to paint the rocks and to paint some of the areas where there's sand. To do that, I'm going to use 4 colors. There's white, black, raw umber, and raw sienna. The only thing these colors have in common is they're all acrylics, and they're all school grade acrylics. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take the China bristle brush, and the bristles are dry on this one, and that's part of what dry brushing means. And I'm going to take some white, and I'm going to take some black, okay, and I'm going to mix it together here till I get a middle gray. I'm going to add a touch of raw sienna to it, and this is going to be the first color I dry brush on the rocks. And what I'm looking for in my case is a New England granite gray. And if you live in the West or the Midwest and the soil is red or dark brown, then you want to adjust your colors accordingly. And you can do that with these 4 colors. When I come to showing you how I paint the sand, you'll see exactly what I mean when I start using the raw sienna. The area of the rocks we're going to start with, you can't judge the color now. All I'm going to do is just dabble on a little bit of this gray that we used. And you can see this is fairly easy. All I'm doing is just adding it to the tops of the rocks. This is the first layer of dry brushing that we're going to do on this. We're going to come back and we're going to add more different colors as we go along. But all I want to do now is bring up the level of the black to a medium gray. And that's what I'm doing. And you can see there are still places here where you can see the scenery black in the shadows. And that's the whole idea of it. Now I'm going to use this same color on my seawalls. And if you remember seeing the seawalls from the Seaport Models display, you know that there's more going on than just this color when we're done here. And I don't care if I get any of this paint on the water. The water has a coat of black on it, and after I get through painting these rocks, then I'm going to go back and paint the water. But the rocks come first. So I'm going over the scenery here, and any place there's a rock face or a rock wall, I'm going to hit it with some gray. Take off these samples, these paint samples, move them over here. I wanted you to see all the different kinds. And there's also tube acrylics, which work just great for this. I tend not to use them, only because I'm cheap, and you only get a little for a lot of money. I favor the school grade acrylics, where you can buy 16 ounces for $4. So I'm going to continue on and just hitting the tops of everything while we go. I've decided that down here beside the road, I'm going to have a little bit of gray rock. Doesn't look like rock much now, but when I'm done with it, it'll look pretty good, I think. So, that's it for the rocks. Now we're going to take the sand areas that are near the water. And for that, I'm going to add some raw sienna to the paint mix. So here's the gray we've been using here in the front. Now I'm going to take some of this raw sienna and I'm going to add it to it to make a color that's almost the same as our earth color here on our little module. Okay, here's the color. Now I'm going to come in here to areas where there are sand, like right along in this part, and I'm just going to start with the first coat. And as you can see, it's only just a little darker than the earth color we use. A lot of white will be added, and you'll be amazed how good it's going to look when we're done with this. I'm going to keep adding some earth colors to places where I did the rocks, only this time I'm adding the earth color on top of the rocks where soil would normally be. And all this color is at this stage is just raw sienna with quite a bit of white in it. I'm going to go along and I'm going to finish this. I'm going to let it dry, and when I come back we'll dry brush the rocks and I'll finish coloring them. This is a 2 or 3 step process to paint these rocks, and what I want to do, I want to get them so they have the same look as the sand color. And you can see here I'm creating a sand color by mixing white with the raw sienna, and then I'm mixing some white with raw umber and I'm creating a shadow. We have the edge where the sand has been washed away with a little bit of shadow underneath, and when I finish this, the only dark part I'll leave is the part just up under the overhang. And I'm going to do that with the rocks too. I'm going to take the raw umber and the white and I'm going to go in here and paint some shadows into the rocks. Now it looks like now I'm just dabbing it around, and I really am. I'm just warming the color up a little bit so that it's similar to the sand. Now on the sand banks on the front of the module, I'm going to paint these the same way. I'm going to take a mixture of the raw umber and white and create a highlight at the top of the sand bank, and then beneath it I'm going to take some more of the raw umber with less white and create a shadow. Below the shadow area, I'm going to try and add the look of sand by mixing some of the raw sienna with white and just creating a highlight. Now I'll tie this all together after this layer of paint dries. I'll tie this all together by dry brushing this bank with more just plain white. Now I've waited for the paint to dry, and I've taken some white, put it on this card, loaded the brush with it, and then wiped most of it off the brush. Now I test how much paint is on the brush by rubbing the brush over the palm of my hand like you see me doing here. What I'm looking for is just enough white so I can see the whorls of my skin, and that way I know I have enough paint on the brush. Now if I have too much paint, what I'll do is just take the brush and I'll rub it on some part of the scenery, because all of the flat areas are going to be covered up eventually. Run it over my hand again to see how much paint is actually on the brush, and then continue dry brushing. Now when you watch this, you might say to yourself, boy, that looks awful white. But you have to remember, we're going to add texture and foliage, and then we're going to touch up these retaining walls and some of the sand areas with chalk. So this is only like the second or third painting these are going to get. They're going to get 3 or 4 more before I'm done. I want everything to be colored so it looks uniformly, and this is one of the steps to do that. Here's the lighthouse. I moved it a little bit out of the way. I had the lighthouse sitting in place because I want to match the color on the rocks of the lighthouse with the rocks in the scenery. The hole you see in the foreground is to fit a piling of a little building that's going in that area. So now we're going around the railroad. Every place there's rock or sand or exposed surfaces, I'm dry brushing them. I really don't care if I get the white on the water or the roads, because everything's going to be repainted before we're done. This little road here is going to kind of run off into the backdrop, but I want to put some seagulls on it, so I want the tops of it to be kind of extra white. Before I go much farther and put the buildings in place, I need to build the backdrop so I can put it up against the back of the module to see how the buildings are going to look and how their placement will be and how everything's going to look together. I'm taking a piece of foam core that's 4 feet wide and 27 inches deep, and what I've done, I've cut other strips of foam core and I've reinforced the edges and reinforced places on the back with thin strips of wood, and these are going to act to reinforce the back when I clamp it to the module. Here's the clamp, and you can see how the wood strip keeps the clamp from crushing the foam core. So now I'm going to make sure that the horizon line is drawn in and that the backdrop is placed correctly, and then I'm going to paint it, and I'm using a blue paint here. So while I'm waiting for the background color to dry, I decided to paint the water. And for the water, you may have seen me do this before, I'm going to use 4 colors. I'm going to use black, that you see here. I'm going to use cerulean blue, a little bit of medium green, and at the end I'm going to use white. I start by using the black. This is school grade acrylic, and it's pretty loose, it's pretty thin. So it's perfect for going along and painting out the edges. You want to have a nice sharp edge between the sand or rocks and the water. Here's the way I like to do it. I'm not much of a painter, I'm more of a dabber. So I've picked up some cerulean blue and I'm dabbing it into the black. And I can see by looking at it right now there's not quite enough. So I'm going to keep adding blue and then a few specks of green as I go until I get the color I want. I want the water to be dark at the edges and lighter in the middle, which is what you see here. I can't reach the big brush into the corner here right under the bridge, so I'm taking a smaller brush and I'm just pulling some paint off the big brush and I'm just pushing it in the corner, as you can see here. Now I'm moving to the back section, and for me this is a grand experiment because I want the water in the foreground to be darker than the water in the background. I want the water right at the horizon of the module here to look like the sun's hitting it. So I'm going to add some white to the color as I go. But first I'm doing the same thing in the back section here. I'm delineating the shoreline, the walls and such from the water. You know, if you make a mistake here and get some of the paint up on the rocks or up on the retaining walls, you can just take a wet brush right now before it sets and go in with plenty of water and wash the acrylic paint away. In fact, you'll have a nice effect because you create a wash here and some of the color will run in between the cracks and crevices and create a nice shadow effect. As you can see, I'm intentionally making the background lighter than the foreground, and it's going to get lighter as I go back towards the horizon in the rear of the module. Here I'm adding blue and quite a bit of white to the back, and this is going to take some blending, so I may blend it forward almost as far as like halfway to the lighthouse. I want to make sure I get the background color blended thoroughly with the foreground so there's no line. I want a gradual lightening as it goes towards the back. Now you can see that there are areas that I haven't blended into yet, especially near the rocks by the lighthouse and in front of the retaining walls. But I'll come back and catch this, and one of the tricks of doing this is to use a brush that is clean and dry. And the clean dry brush, you want it to come in and just kind of blend everything together. It doesn't have any paint on it, but what it does, it picks up the paint from the water surface and then it moves it around as you daub, and it blends it back in. Now the next step is for me to go away and allow this to dry. And while I'm waiting for it to dry, I'm going to paint the waterline, the horizon, in on my backdrop. And I'm going to use exactly the same colors I'm using here. I'm going to use the cerulean blue, a little bit of black, some green, and a bit of white. And what I want to do, I want to add enough white so that I can see a little sparkle at the horizon, so that it looks like the sun is just glinting off the areas of water that are farthest away. The last step before I leave the water, I think I'm going to add right here a little bit of turmoil. So I'm adding some white and some blue and some green coming out from under the bridge. I want it to look like the water there is moving fast and it's draining out of the bay towards the horizon. So the next step here is to put the backdrop back on and see how it looks. I've decided at this time to put the buildings in before I add the backdrop, because I want to stand in back of the module where I am now and install the buildings. It'll give me some room. I won't have to reach around or reach over the layout. What I've done here in this location, I've lowered the scenery a little bit. I thought that the Robin Hood beer building that I'm going to put here was standing too high and it was competing with the lighthouse. So what I did, I cut out the foam, put in a couple of pieces of 1/4-inch foam core, made a base, and then I took a drywall tool, which is a hole puncher for drywall. It's like a round rasp, and I poked a hole through for the wires for the structure, and now I've put down Beacon's 3-in-1 adhesive. I use this stuff for everything. I love it. It's like a rubbery airplane cement, only it doesn't attack foam. And you can use it like a contact cement or as like a glue. You can even use it as a gap filler. So what I'm doing, I'm pushing the building down in place. I want to make sure it's level here. And it looks pretty good, so I'm going to go away and leave it. And I'm going to install this building, which I guess is a plumbing supply. I don't have any signs on it to identify it, but it's got a lot of junk out beside it. And it's got a flat styrene base with no illumination inside. It was built at a time before I was putting a lot of lights inside of buildings. So what I have here, I have a pad that I made out of foam core that I'm putting the glue on. I'm putting the 3-in-1 on right now. And what I'll do with the building is I'll put it on the pad. I'm going to smear it around a little bit to make sure the glue gets spread out, and then I'm going to make a contact cement out of it. I'm going to keep moving it up and down so that some of the solvent in the glue can escape, and then when I finally push it in place, it'll have a nice contact bond. Now I noticed when I looked at it that some of the edges of the concrete base that the building is on are curled up a little bit. So I'm going to put a weight both front and back to make sure that it stays flat and level. So here we are. All of the buildings except the one that sits in the water are in place, and now I'm going to go away and let the glue dry a little bit. We'll add the greenery and put it all together. The first thing I want to do is to seal the water surface. So I'm going to put on one layer of Mod Podge. What this does, it seals up the paint and makes it easy to clean if we get some foliage on the paint surface. So you don't have to be too careful when you do this. I'm using a China bristle brush, and I'm just laying on enough Mod Podge so that the surface is completely covered. I am being very careful not to incorporate bubbles into the surface. I'm taking the tip of the brush and I'm going ahead and breaking all the bubbles so that they don't dry and leave a little crater on the water surface. A handy trick to keep in mind when you're putting the first layer on your water here is to keep a few Q-tips handy in case the brush slips and you get some Mod Podge up on the bridge or on the rocks or other places where you don't want them. Just use the Q-tip to wipe away the Mod Podge. Now I'm going to go work on something else while this whole water surface dries. It's best if you let this first coat dry overnight. And that's something else that I'm going to do, is to work on the backdrop. What I've done, I've painted this piece of foam core blue, and then I drew in a horizon line and I painted the cerulean blue water surface right at the horizon line. And then when that dried, I took the whole thing outside, and with a can of white spray paint, I sprayed in the cloud cover that's over the water. Now what I'm doing, I'm taking a fan brush with a little teeny bit of white paint on the tips of the bristles, and I'm brushing in just a little bit of sparkle or a little bit of wave action. And I'm using the straight edge here just because I want everything to be parallel with the horizon. As soon as this dries, I'm going to coat the water with some acrylic gloss varnish. What I want to do here, I want to give the water some sparkle, some gloss, and I want to protect it because I'm going to do other painting on top of it, and I'll show you that next. When I had the backdrop clamped against the back of the module, I drew this line, as you can see where my finger is pointing, and this is where the land area is going to be. It's where the end of the road that runs through the module ends, and it's going to end on beach sand. So what I'm doing, I'm taking the fan brush, and I have some green, some tan, and a little bit of yellow, and I'm going to use these to create some sand dunes in the distance, and I'm going to be mixing all the colors on the brush so that I get that fan look. I get that look of, well, almost a buffalo grass look. In the low spot here is where the road is going to end, so what I'm going to do there is just take some of the tan and mix a little bit of yellow with it and lay in the road. And this doesn't have to be too detailed, it's just a color. And probably you won't even see this when I'm done because there's buildings, and then there will eventually be foliage here. So all we're doing is creating the illusion of distance by trying to fool the eye. So the next step is to allow this paint to dry, and once it's dry, I'm going to clamp the background back onto the back of the module to see how it all looks. While there's still this color paint wet in the brush, I'm going to take some of it, go to the module, and paint it right on the end of the road so that the end of the road will blend into this little tan area that I've put in. So now it's time to think about the foliage, the greenery that's going to be on our module. Adding texture over texture is the basis of the water-soluble scenery system. So when I put down ground cover, I like to use what I call the sandwich approach. That is, you put down a dilute layer of white glue first, covering all the land areas you want your textures to stick to. Then you sprinkle on your texture, and then you wet it down with a little wet water, and then you add another layer of glue using matte medium. This white glue here has been diluted with just enough water to make it easily brushable. So it's not quite one-to-one, but it's close to it. And I don't care if it puddles up. As you can see behind the building here, it's puddled up a little bit, and I don't care about that because I'm going to put another layer of greenery and then adhesive on top, which is the matte medium. So the little puddling doesn't make any difference at all. The green foam or green texture I'm using on this project is just a blend of several different colors. I like blends because they add a lot of character. There's not a solid color there. This blend has coarse and fine green of probably 3 or 4 different shades. It has a little brown scenic foam in it, maybe a little of the knock leaves, and probably a little bit of either yellow, or sometimes there'll be a little bit of bark texture, and anything else that's laying around, really, because this is a great way to use up all the leftovers of textures and bits and pieces that you have laying around after a project. So what I've done here, I've added a base layer, and now I'm putting a little solid green foam. This is a blend of foam and flocking. This is from Scenic Express. The next step is to mist on some wet water. What you want to do, you don't want the water dripping out. You just want to dampen the area. So when you spray on the dilute matte medium, it'll sink right into the greenery and hold it all together. Now I have to be very judicious here about keeping the water clean, because when I spray on the matte medium, I don't want it to glue the scenic foam that's spilled over into the water area. In fact, what I'm doing here really is working around the water area first, and between every step I make sure I clean it thoroughly, because I want the water to be pristine when the module is completed. So this is 3-in-1, 3 parts water to 1 part matte medium, dilute, in a spray bottle, and I'm just spraying it on. Of course, the object here is to soak everything down, but as you'll see in the next step, I want the ground surface to be wet because I'm going to put on static grass. I'm using the Knock Grassmaster to apply the static grass, and what I've done, I've taken the ground clamp and I've clamped it to a pin, and I've stuck the pin in the ground near where I'm applying the grass. Now this is 6mm static grass in the applicator, and I'm using the piece of cardboard here as a mask to keep the static grass from going into the water. Now I'm going to put static grass everywhere where there's ground cover. I want the module to have a low, marshy look. Using static grass is a way to achieve this. Now the next step here is to go away and allow the static grass to dry. But now I want to add some dirt around the base of the sheepscot building in the background. And I'm going to do this the same way. I'm just going to put on some dilute white glue, and I'm going to try my best not to get any on the building, but if I do, it's okay because I'll brush it away after I apply the sand or the sifted dirt around the base of the building. Once all the sifted dirt is in place, I want to clean the water, and this is important because I don't want any of this dirt to remain on the water. So I'm using a wet brush here just to brush away the excess dirt that's fallen onto the waterway. And I'll use a paper towel just to make sure that the water surface is dry before I go away and leave it. Now that the water is nice and clean, I'm going to start by putting on coat after coat of Mod Podge. And I'm using a small brush here to push it under the bridge. But generally, the way I like to apply Mod Podge is with a large, fluffy brush called a mop brush. You can also use a makeup brush for this. And this is the way I apply it. I put some Mod Podge on the brush, and I just push it into place. Now, so far on this module, I have probably 6 layers of Mod Podge, and I'll put on 3 or 4 more until it looks right. After each layer is applied, I go around and inspect all the edges, and if there is any Mod Podge that has crept up or gotten on the rocks or on the seawalls, I just take a Q-tip and remove it. I'm going to finish up by putting seaweed along the rocks, but I still don't want a big buildup of Mod Podge along the edges. I want it to look like water that has come right up to the edge of the rock. Now's the time to put the background in place and check how everything looks together. How does the building placement look? Does it please me? Is there good composition? Are there a lot of really good photo angles? Well, it's really hard to tell right now. The buildings seem all to work well together. So the next step is to place some trees and see how it looks. And then I have to take a hard look at how the horizon on the module meets the background and how they work together. Before I start detailing my module, I need to ballast the track. And you've probably seen me do this 100 times in other videos. But what I'm using a mixture of the lightweight ballast and rock to get the color I want. Now I hate the lightweight ballast, but I'm using it here because I have it and it's the right color and right texture. So I mixed it with some rock, and now I'm using a piece of foam rubber from a box that an engine or a diesel would come in, and I'm using it to spread the ballast between the rails. And I've cut this piece of rubber so that it's just the right size to fit right between the rails, and you can just push it along and push the ballast out of place. Now, ballasting should be relaxing. You've got all day to do this, so you want to make sure that it's perfect. So take your time when you ballast. Use your fingers, use a brush, and you want the ballast spread out and you want it perfectly placed before you apply the glue to it. That way you don't have to go back and redo any areas. So what I'm doing here, I'm just sprinkling some excess ballast along the edge. I want it to look mounded up. This is, after all, a main line, and I want it to look like it's well maintained. So I'm mounding the ballast along the edges here and getting everything perfectly in place before I apply the wet water. So here I'm wetting down all of the ballast I've put in place so far with wet water. Wet water is just a pint of water with a couple of teaspoons of dishwashing detergent in it. And I'm wetting it down so the water will flow completely into the ballast. I want the ballast all to be wet before I apply the glue. And for the glue, I'm using matte medium that has been diluted 3-to-1 with water. That's 3 parts water to 1 part matte medium. And I'm using the same dispenser here, and I'm flowing it in, and I want it to completely turn the ballast white. I want to add way too much matte medium, more than you think you'll need, because I want it to flow in and hold all of those little rocks together. So you need plenty of glue to do that. So that's it. I'm going to go away and let it dry, and as soon as it's dry, I'm going to start detailing my module. And the first detail I'm going to put on it are the trees. Most of the trees on the module are made from pepper grass, and this is how it looks before I paint it. What I do, I take the individual sprigs, spray paint them, and then bundle them together using florist tape. Once they're bundled together, I spray paint them again, in this case with many shades of green, and then while the paint is still wet, I sprinkle on some of the knock leaf foliage. On the left side of the module, I've also added several peppergrass trees along with several traditional trees, ones with plastic armatures and fiber-fill foliage. You can see I've also put in several small boats. The little barge is made by Foss, and it was included in one of their kits, and it's made out of paper. I also added some barrels and crates and all kinds of other details. The structure on the left is a Foss kit, and the model of motif number 1 in the background is made from resin castings. The originals were made by Bob Hayden. The little lobster shack in the foreground was made from a kit, and I can't recall at this moment who made the kit, but I've had the building around for several years, and I decided to dress it up and make it look like a lobsterman's shanty. I added a plastic lobster to the top of the building, some oars, a few lobster traps, and of course a fisherman trying to catch a bluefish on the pier. This is another structure of dubious origin. I had it on the shelf, and it's a little bit overscale for HO, so I put it smack dab in the foreground where its little larger size would not be a distraction. Behind this foreground building, I added a little garden, and I had the pumpkin and the melon castings already on hand, and all I did was paint them, and I made a little corner in the foreground with a pasture because I wanted people to be able to see the station, so I didn't want to put anything high in the foreground of the module. The station is made out of plastic castings, and it was offered many years ago by Train and Trooper. It's a model of the Marble Station that sits on the banks of the Rangeley Lakes in Rangeley, Maine. Here's a structure that's made out of styrene, and it's made from bits and pieces that I had laying around in the scrap box. There are cast plastic and cast metal windows and doors on it, and I managed to use a whole bunch of detail parts around the edges of it. The Robin Hood Beer Company is just a plastic kit that I had on the shelf. I had built it a while ago, and I don't even know who made it at this point. I found the Robin Hood sign in a box of stuff and added it to this structure to make it Robin Hood beer. Last but not least is this little bungalow that I had on the shelf, and I put a few details on it and set it in the background. I wanted a small building for the end of the street. And lastly, here's a behind the scenes look. This is the part of the module that most visitors don't see when they view it from the front. And I still have some details and some things to add before the scene is complete.